The Balfour Declaration, by which British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour addressed a letter to Lord Lionel Arthur Rothschild, one of the leaders of the British Jewish congregation, to pass it on to the Zionist Union of Great Britain and Ireland. The content of the letter was a promise to establish a national home for the Jews in Palestine. In fact, this promise was not the only one made by Great Britain during the First World War with regard to what was then known as the Near East. The term Middle East came later. Rather, there were many promises, including the promise of a united Arab kingdom in the Fertile Crescent in 1916 in what was known as the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence, and other promises to France to divide the spheres of influence in the same region under the title of what became known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Great Britain was distributing the promises of right and left, and the essence of all was to inherit the Ottoman Empire, and what was known at the time as the sick man of Europe, so it was distributed among Jews, Arabs, French, Greeks, and others as well as was imposed by the results of the current war. It is certain that the British promises were all in conflict, and even contradict each other. The final decision in what happened in reality relied a lot on the ability of the other parties, so the Jews were the most successful, so they knew how to turn a promise into a statement to emigrate, and they knew how to turn the national home into a nation-state, and more than that they knew how to transform a dwarf state according to the partition decision that it was issued by the United Nations. General Assembly No. 181 of 1947 to an empire that occupied the lands of 3 Arab countries in addition to all of Palestine as of the issuance of Security Council Resolution No. 242 on November 22, 1967 to cease fire for the June War of the same year. The Arabs, Turks, Greeks, and others got pieces of the empire less than their dreams, and Ataturk succeeded in inheriting Turkish states that succeeded the empire, and in any case it resulted from what happened a century ago as happened with the Balfour Declaration, or 70 years as happened with the partition decision, or 50 years as happened with Resolution 242, waves of conflict and peacemaking are still being fought by the people of the region today. Our subject, in any case, is the memory of the Balfour Declaration. Both Resolution 181 and Resolution 242 were its aftermath, and in their entirety they constitute a process that research centers and universities are trying to understand what happened in it, and whether it was necessary for all its parties to go through the same sacrifices, or was there other options. The first lesson we learn has always been that creating facts on the ground has been more powerful than legal or moral arguments. It shows the basic difference between the Jewish political elite and the Palestinian political elite. The difference was not only in the Jewish settlement on land that they did not have before. The Palestinians were already on the land, but it was in the ability to build political, economic, and social institutions. At that time, the Jews did not have those global advantages that they get now. It was universally common that the Jews killed Christ. Nazism and fascism were anti-Jewish, and at times Jews were not welcome, neither refugees nor individuals, in many countries and locations. On the contrary, it was the Palestinians with Arab extensions, who lived in their country and on their land, who did little to build the nucleus of the Palestinian state. Yes, there were attempts, but the difference was big, perhaps due to the British occupation, and perhaps due to the striking backwardness, and perhaps due to other factors, but the result is that at the time the partition decision was issued, the Jews were ready to run the state and fight for it. On the contrary, the Palestinians depended on the Arab countries, which were also suffering from colonialism and their own problems. The result was that the All-Palestine government in Gaza, and the union with Jordan did not succeed in preserving what was left of Palestine. The second lesson is that military force, whatever its capabilities, has limits, and it alone cannot achieve the goals of any of the parties to the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Arabs failed in 1948 and 1967, but the Israelis failed in 1956 and 1973. More than that, they failed to suppress the first and second Palestinian uprisings, and when they stopped, that was the result of diplomatic and political action. Israel, no matter how many military victories it has achieved, it has become clear to it that it cannot subdue the Palestinians and push them out of Palestine. At the present time, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea there are about 12 million people, half of whom are Israeli Jews and half of them are Palestinian Arabs, standing face to face, sometimes along all of Palestine, and sometimes in the narrow area of the sacred plateau where the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Western Wall are located. The demographic presence as such, and the holy places as they came from history and religious sentiments, they are also major facts on the ground. The third lesson, that the conflict had perseverance and enough internal energy to continue while the whole world was changing. It started in the First World War, and lived the Second War with its consequences on the Jews, Arabs, and the Palestinians, then after that the Cold War and its vicissitudes, and then its end with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the transformations and contractions that followed the collapse of the World Trade Center in New York. The wrestlers had to adapt to a changing reality and try to take advantage of everything new, but the result was a fourth lesson, which is that the major transformations in the course of the conflict occurred only when direct dialogue took place between Arabs and Jews, and between Arab countries and Israel. This happened with regard to the Israeli occupation of Sinai, the Camp David talks, the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, and then the Jordanian-Israeli peace treaty, and what is between them resulted from the Oslo Accords that established for the first time the Palestinian National Authority on Palestinian land in a Palestinian reality on the ground that is not only threatened by Israeli violence, but also the Palestinians forget that their goal is to establish a state that is not based on division between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, or that yields to family and regionalism that makes the citizenship state a cake that is divided on other than the basis of citizenship. 100 years after the Balfour Declaration, 70 years after the Partition Resolution, and 50 years after the June War, they all tell of a great tragedy that needs to be read again and not weep over the ruins, perhaps most importantly, a view of the future. The Arab Peace Initiative may be the key to looking into arranging situations in a region that did not know the arrangement until other countries carried out it, as Britain did in its promises.